They called the widow crazy, but when the snowstorm alarms finally screamed across Aspen, 60-year-old Margaret Thompson was still outside, lifting the last stones to complete the giant wall around her home. Her hands were bruised, cracked, and bleeding, proof of weeks of exhausting work no one believed had a purpose. Just 6 months earlier, she had buried her husband, William, the man who left her strange instructions that the town mocked, until nature proved him right. The birds vanished from the trees, the dogs howled through the night, and the sky turned darker than winter itself. No one understood why this grieving woman chose a wall over rest, silence over explanation, and preparation over doubt. Not even her closest neighbor, Mrs. Dorothy, who once called it madness to her face. But this time, the wall wasn't just a rumor, it was salvation. And by the way, where are you watching from? If stories like this touch your heart, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video with your friends. Real emotional stories like this only reach more people when you support the channel. Send it to someone who believes love and courage can survive any storm. The first rays of dawn barely touched the sleepy town of Aspen, but Margaret Caldwell was already at work. Her hands were raw, her back ached, and her clothes were soaked with the morning's dew. Yet she moved steadily, hauling heavy stones one by one, placing each with the precision of someone who had measured every detail in her mind. The wall she was building around her property was enormous, so large that anyone passing by could see it stretching along the perimeter of her land, a line of determination carved out of stone and sweat. From the edge of the street, whispers began almost immediately. Old Mrs. Weller shook her head as she peered from behind her curtains. Young families passing by slowed down, exchanging curious glances. Even those who had once been friendly with Margaret avoided eye contact. "Poor woman," one neighbor murmured. "She's lost it after William passed." The town had never been particularly unkind, but in small places like Aspen, rumors spread like wildfire. Within hours, Margaret's endeavor had become the subject of speculation, gossip, and even quiet derision. People didn't understand. They couldn't. How could someone in the depths of grief focus so entirely on building a wall? And why, when she could have been resting, seeking comfort or solace, did she insist on this grueling labor? It was Mrs. Dorothy, her closest neighbor, who could no longer contain herself. She walked down the narrow lane separating their properties, the sound of her boots crunching against gravel, alerting Margaret to her approach. Margaret, for all her focus, paused only briefly, wiping the sweat and dust from her brow with the back of her already scratched and stained hand. Her eyes, still red from sleepless nights and unrelenting grief, fixed on Dorothy. "Margaret, for heaven's sake, what are you doing?" Dorothy's voice carried both worry and exasperation. "This is madness. You're going to wear yourself out carrying those stones. Mr. William wouldn't want to see you like this." Margaret took a deep breath, steadying herself before speaking. "Mrs. Dorothy, I know what I'm doing. This isn't madness. It's necessary." "Necessary?" Dorothy shook her head, incredulous. "He's gone. William is gone. None of this will bring him back. You can't keep punishing yourself like this." Margaret's hands clenched around the cold stone she had just placed, her knuckles white. "I am not punishing myself," she said, her voice calm but unwavering. "My husband left instructions. He wanted me to do this, and I intend to follow them." The air between them was heavy with tension. Dorothy's eyes softened as she realized that no argument, no gentle persuasion would sway Margaret. She was determined, steadfast in a way that even grief could not weaken. I worry for you," Dorothy said finally, her voice almost breaking. "I know," Margaret replied. A faint smile touched her lips, though it was quickly replaced by solemnity. I appreciate it, but I have to do this. For him. For me. For what's coming." Dorothy shook her head one last time, her heart heavy with concern, and walked back to her own yard. Margaret watched her retreat, feeling a mix of frustration and sorrow. She didn't hate them for not understanding. How could they? They had not shared the life she had shared with William. They had not heard his guidance, witnessed his wisdom, or seen the meticulous care he took in preparing for things others deemed impossible. Margaret returned to her task, her body aching with each lift, her muscles screaming in protest. Yet as she placed each stone, she felt a quiet satisfaction. This wall was more than a barrier against the cold snow or wind. It was a testament, a monument to her love, her devotion, and her commitment to follow through on a promise she had made not just to William, but to herself. Her son, Robert, had offered to help earlier, but Margaret had insisted on doing most of it herself. She needed to feel the weight of each stone, to test her strength, to remind herself that grief did not mean weakness. She allowed Robert to assist only with the larger stones, the ones that required more than one set of hands. Yet even then, she maintained control, directing the placement with the precision of an architect who had memorized every detail. As the sun climbed higher, the town's murmurs grew louder. Children whispered behind their parents' backs, sneaking glances at the woman who refused to rest. People shook their heads, muttering about lost minds and broken hearts. Yet Margaret paid them no mind. Each stone she set into place was a reminder of her husband's love, of his foresight, and of the belief that she could withstand whatever life or nature had in store for her. By midday, sweat dripped from her hair, soaking her blouse, and streaks of dirt ran down her face like war paint. Her muscles trembled from exhaustion, yet her hands were steady. Margaret paused for a moment, taking in the progress she had made. The wall was beginning to take shape, a formidable barrier that seemed almost alive, as if it too carried the weight of her determination. Robert approached quietly, carrying water bottles and a few sandwiches. "Mom," he said gently, "maybe you should rest for a bit. You've been at this since sunrise." Margaret's head shook. "No, Robert, not yet. I'm close to finishing this section, and every stone counts. Resting now, it would be a waste. We don't have time to waste." Her son hesitated, worried, but he knew better than to argue. He simply set down the supplies and stayed nearby, ready to assist, his eyes scanning the sky for any signs of the unusual weather patterns his father had once warned about. The wind had begun to pick up slightly, brushing against Margaret's face, and the sky carried an odd gray hue that even he noticed, but neither spoke of it yet. Margaret's focus could not be interrupted. As afternoon faded into evening, the town's murmurs slowly gave way to an uneasy respect. Even those who had doubted her, who had called her reckless, began to notice something undeniable. Margaret Caldwell, a widow still raw from loss, was building a wall with such precision, determination, and strength that it was impossible to dismiss as mere madness. The first chapter of her labor, the first day in what would be weeks of grueling work, ended with Margaret standing atop the slight incline she had managed to create, surveying the stones she had laid. She felt the chill of the evening wind against her neck, but did not shiver. In her heart, she knew that the wall was more than a physical structure. It was a statement. It was a declaration to the town, to herself, and to the memory of her husband, that she would not be broken, that she would prepare for what was coming, and that she would honor the guidance William had left behind. As night fell, Margaret cleaned her hands, her skin raw and blistered, and looked once more at the half-finished wall. Her eyes, though tired, gleamed with purpose. She whispered softly, almost to herself, "I will do this. I will finish it, and they will see. They will understand one day." In the quiet of her home, Robert watched her.
admiration and concern warring within him. He knew the path his mother had chosen was not an easy one, but he also knew that Margaret Caldwell had the strength of someone who had already survived storms far greater than the ones the wind and snow could bring. And so, under the first stars of the evening sky, the wall stood partially completed, a promise, a shield, a testament to love, resilience, and the unwavering determination of a woman the town had once called crazy.
The morning after Margaret finished the first section of the wall, Robert stepped outside to check the progress. The chill in the air was sharper than usual for early November, and a gray haze lingered over the mountains surrounding Aspen. He noticed the birds were unusually quiet. Not a single robin or sparrow chirped. Even the neighborhood dogs, usually restless in the morning, were lying low, their ears twitching at some sound only they could hear. Robert frowned. Something about the atmosphere felt off, though he couldn't immediately put his finger on it. He walked toward the half-built wall, where Margaret was already at work again, hauling stones with the same tireless determination that had surprised and concerned him yesterday. "Mom," he said cautiously, "have you noticed anything strange today? The birds, the wind, the air feels heavier than usual." Margaret glanced up from her work, her face streaked with dust and sweat, and nodded. "I've felt it, Robert. That's why I insisted on finishing the wall. Your father always said there are signs we can't ignore, and nature rarely lies." Robert paused, intrigued. "Signs?" Margaret placed a large stone carefully into the wall and wiped her hands on her apron. "Your father observed things most people overlook: the clouds, the wind, the behavior of animals. He kept records for decades, noting patterns in weather that others dismissed because they didn't fit their computer models." Robert frowned, recalling his father's library of notebooks filled with hand-drawn charts and meticulous records of snow, temperature, and wind currents. "I remember glimpsing those notebooks," he said quietly. "I never realized he was on to something big." Margaret nodded. "He discovered a climate cycle, about 60 years, a pattern of winters far harsher than anyone predicted. Most meteorologists only work with the last decade or two of data. William went back further, studying historical records, newspapers, even personal journals of farmers and mountain dwellers. He found correlations that were impossible to ignore." Robert's curiosity deepened. 60 years? That means the last one would have been 1965, right? "Yes," Margaret replied, her eyes distant, as if she could see that winter through the years. The winter of 1965 was brutal. Snow piled so high it blocked entire streets. Winds tore roofs from houses. People were trapped in their homes for weeks, and no one predicted it. Not the authorities, not the meteorologists. Robert took a step back, suddenly aware of the implications. "So you're saying the wall might not be madness at all?" Margaret's expression softened. "It's hard for people to believe in something they can't immediately see, but this isn't about proving them right. It's about being prepared. That's what William taught me, and what he left for me to carry on." Robert pulled out his laptop, determined to see the evidence for himself. As he searched archives for newspapers, photographs, and meteorological records from 1965, he found page after page confirming what his mother had said. Headlines screamed about record snowfalls, towns isolated for days, damage far worse than any living resident could remember. The storm had been exceptional, catastrophic even, and yet it had arrived without warning. "This is incredible," Robert muttered, scrolling through images of snow-laden streets and toppled trees. "No one saw this coming, and your father predicted it?" Margaret nodded, laying a stone carefully in place. "He couldn't predict the exact day, of course, but he knew the pattern. He knew that the timing of this cycle meant we had to prepare. That wall, every stone, is part of that preparation. And now, Robert, it's your turn to understand what he taught me.
The wall isn't just stone, it's foresight, it's protection, it's love. Robert looked at her, a mixture of awe and disbelief on his face. I understand, but it's hard to believe. Even with all this evidence, it feels like something out of a storybook. Why didn't anyone else see it? Because most people only see what their models and instruments tell them. They don't observe. They don't compare decades of history. Your father did both. He trusted what he could see with his own eyes and verify with records. That's why he prepared and why I must finish the wall. The day wore on. Robert continued his research while keeping a watchful eye on Margaret. She moved like a force of nature herself, her determination unwavering, despite the bruises forming on her hands and the sweat dripping down her face. As he worked, he couldn't help but notice subtle signs in the environment, clouds forming in unusual shapes, the wind direction shifting in ways he'd never learned about in meteorology classes, animals acting out of routine. The signs were small, almost imperceptible to an untrained eye, but to Robert, they were growing increasingly obvious. His father had been right all along. William's wisdom had not been madness, it had been knowledge overlooked by those who relied solely on technology rather than intuition and observation. By evening, Robert returned to Margaret, who had just placed the last stone for the day. Her hands were bloodied, her muscles tight, but her face held a quiet satisfaction. "Mom, I think he was right," Robert said softly. Margaret smiled faintly. "He always was. And now, Robert, you have a choice. You can continue to doubt, or you can help me prepare as he intended, because the winter coming, it will test us all." Robert hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "I'll help. I want to understand, and I want to be ready. Tell me everything he taught me." And so the two of them sat on the small porch, the half-built wall behind them, as Margaret began recounting William's lessons, how to observe nature, how to cross-reference historical records, and how to notice patterns invisible to most people. Hours passed as Robert listened, captivated. He realized that the wall, far from being madness, was a shield forged by love, experience, and foresight. Later that night, Robert stayed up, poring over the archives of 1965, noting the storm's intensity, snowfall amounts, and winds. He compared them to earlier decades, 1905 and even 1845, confirming the cyclical pattern his mother described. The weight of realization settled on him. If William's observations were correct, then this winter could be as severe as the one decades ago. And if that were the case, the wall would be the difference between protection and disaster. The next morning, as Margaret resumed work, Robert approached her. "Mom," he said quietly, "I found something. The patterns, they're consistent. Every 60 years, a winter far worse than anything in recent memory hits. And this year, we might be next." Margaret nodded, placing another stone carefully. "Then we work faster. Every stone counts. We prepare not just for us, but for anyone who might need shelter. Your father always believed the house should be a refuge, not just a home." Robert looked at the wall, its solid structure beginning to form a formidable barrier. The town might still whisper, might still doubt, but he no longer questioned. Margaret Caldwell wasn't mad. She was wise. And the wall wasn't madness. It was survival, love, and foresight carved into stone. As the sun set behind the mountains, the sky darkened in an unusual shade of gray. The wind picked up, rustling leaves and bending small branches. Robert glanced at the clouds, their shape oddly dense and ominous. He shivered slightly, feeling the weight of what was coming. "Mom," he said softly, "we might really be facing the storm." Margaret didn't look up from her work. Her hands moved with unshakable precision, placing stone after stone. "Then we work faster. Every stone counts. We prepare not just for us, but for anyone who might need shelter. Your father always believed the house should be a refuge, not just a home." The half-built wall standing against the encroaching dusk seemed almost alive, a silent promise that the Caldwell home and the family within would survive whatever nature had in store. And as night fell over Aspen, Robert finally understood William's hidden wisdom was more than knowledge. It was a legacy.
By mid-morning, the small town of Aspen carried on as if nothing unusual were happening. Children laughed on their way to school, shopkeepers swept sidewalks, and neighbors chatted over fences about trivial matters. Yet around the Caldwell property, the atmosphere felt heavy, almost tense. Robert stepped onto the porch, rubbing his eyes. "Mom, something's different today. The air, it feels thicker, colder." Margaret didn't look up from the stone she was lifting, her hands blistered but steady. "I know, Robert. I've felt it since dawn, and the animals know it too." He followed her gaze toward the woods bordering their property. Normally, the robins and sparrows would dart between trees, chirping, searching for seeds and insects. But today, the branches were empty. Not a single bird sang. Not a single squirrel skittered along the ground. Even the neighborhood dogs, who usually barked at every passerby, lay silent in their yards. "It's like nature itself is holding its breath," Robert whispered. Margaret nodded. "Exactly. Your father always said, when the animals act differently, pay attention. They feel changes we cannot yet measure." She wiped her brow with a rag, revealing faint streaks of dried blood and dirt. And the signs, they'd been growing for days. The clouds, the wind, the behavior of the creatures around us. I just wish the rest of the town could see what I see. Meanwhile, in his small office cluttered with instruments and computers, Daniel, the local meteorologist, stared at a monitor, squinting at lines and graphs that didn't make sense. For the past 24 hours, his equipment had been reporting erratic fluctuations in atmospheric pressure and unusual shifts in wind direction. Normally, these instruments followed predictable patterns, but this data was completely abnormal. Pressure's dropping too fast for this time of year. Winds are shifting northwest. Temperatures colder than expected, Daniel muttered, his voice barely audible. He rubbed his forehead, feeling a growing sense of unease. He had seen snowstorms before, but never like this, never with such rapid formation and unpredictable movement. Daniel picked up his phone and dialed Margaret's number. "Mrs. Caldwell?" he said when she answered. "It's Daniel. I need to speak with you about something urgent." Margaret set down the stone she was about to place and wiped her hands. "What is it, Daniel?" He hesitated. "The equipment is showing anomalies I've never recorded before. Pressure fluctuations, wind changes, temperatures dropping in a way that doesn't match any model. If I'm reading this correctly, a major storm is forming, and it could reach Aspen in 3 days." Margaret's heart skipped a beat, but her face remained calm. "I suspected as much. Your instruments are confirming what I've been feeling and observing. Thank you, Daniel. Will you warn anyone else?" I can try, but people might not believe me. The data seems impossible." Margaret took a deep breath. "Just warn those who will listen. Anyone who wants shelter can come here. We have space. And Daniel, thank you for believing the signs before it's too late." On the Caldwell property, Margaret and Robert continued their work on the wall. The wind had begun to pick up, carrying a biting chill that made their muscles tense with cold and effort. The half-finished wall cast long shadows on the snowy ground, a stark contrast to the gray sky overhead. Robert paused for a moment, rubbing his arms. "Mom, look, the clouds. They're denser, heavier than normal. And the sky, it's almost greenish-gray." Margaret studied the sky carefully, squinting against the low sun. "Exactly. That's another sign. A storm doesn't just arrive, it announces itself. Your father taught me to read these warnings, and I see them now." The animal's disappearance added to the eerie feeling. Not a single bird, squirrel, or fox had been spotted near the woods. Even the family's own cat, usually prowling the yard, stayed close to the house, its fur fluffed against the wind.
It's like they know what's coming, Robert said, shivering. Margaret placed another stone in the wall, her hands trembling slightly, not from exhaustion, but from anticipation. They do. Animals respond instinctively to pressure changes, vibrations in the ground, shifts in temperature. Humans ignore them, but they have always been nature's early warning system. Robert stepped back and looked at the structure they were building. The wall was halfway complete, but every stone placed today brought a renewed sense of urgency. Mom, I think I understand now. This isn't about stubbornness or grief. This is survival. Margaret's eyes softened as she looked at her son. It's more than survival, Robert. This wall is proof of foresight. It's proof that your father's wisdom, his knowledge, his attention to the world around him wasn't just eccentric. It's real. It matters. And now we act on it. Daniel returned in the afternoon, breathless and tense. Mrs. Caldwell, I've spoken to some of the neighbors. Some will listen. A few will come. Others won't believe it until it's too late. Margaret nodded. Then we focus on what we can control. The wall, the property, the people who are willing to prepare. That's all we need for now. By evening, the wind had grown colder and more insistent. Leaves rustled in strange patterns. Twigs snapped under unseen pressure, and the half-built wall seemed to groan slightly under the force of the wind. Margaret's instincts told her the storm was closer than the models predicted. She glanced at Robert. 3 days, you said? She asked quietly. Daniel nodded. Yes, and it's gaining strength faster than anything I've recorded in my career. Margaret's hands tightened around the cold stone she was placing, not from fear, but from anticipation. Then we finish the wall, no matter what. Every stone counts, every hour counts. And Robert, we stay alert. Nature is trying to tell us something. We cannot ignore it. As darkness fell, the wind carried a new intensity, almost a whisper through the trees, warning of what was to come. Robert helped his mother secure loose stones and reinforce the perimeter of the wall. Their movements were deliberate, precise, and silent, each action a preparation against the unknown force approaching their home. That night, as Margaret sat by the window, looking at the shadowed mountains and the forest beyond, she realized that her grief for William had transformed into determination. His lessons, his wisdom, and his insistence on observing the world around them were more relevant than ever. The town may still call me crazy, she whispered to herself, tracing a finger along the window pane as if William were there. But I know the truth, and we will survive. Outside, the air had grown colder, heavier, as if the approaching storm had begun to press against the town itself. The animals had vanished completely, leaving silence in their place. Even the usual rustle of leaves had diminished, replaced by a foreboding calm that set every nerve on edge. Robert, sitting beside his mother, finally broke the silence. Mom, it's real, isn't it? The storm, the one Dad warned us about? Margaret's eyes met his, steady and unwavering. It's real, Robert, and we are ready, or we will be. William's wisdom, the signs in nature, the knowledge we've gained, it all comes together now. This storm will test us, but it will not defeat us. Daniel's equipment continued to beep in the distance, confirming what Margaret already knew. This wasn't a prediction. It wasn't a theory. Nature itself had aligned to prove her right. The signs had been there for days, but only those willing to look closely and to listen would understand. As the night deepened, the wind outside intensified, swirling around the half-finished wall. Margaret placed a final stone for the day and stepped back, her breath visible in the frigid air. She didn't feel fear. She felt focus, determination, and a quiet triumph. The storm was coming, but this time, Margaret Caldwell and those who would heed her warning would not face it unprepared.
The following morning, Aspen was buzzing with an unusual tension. For weeks, the townspeople had whispered about Margaret Caldwell and her obsessive wall building. Now, with Daniel's warnings and the unusual weather readings confirmed, the whispers turned to uneasy murmurs of concern. Daniel moved from house to house, urging the neighbors to take the storm seriously. Many dismissed him, shaking their heads in disbelief. "It's just snow," one man scoffed. "It won't be anything unusual." But a few, especially those who had grown wary of unpredictable winters, began to reconsider. By late afternoon, families started making their way toward the Caldwell property, carrying blankets, food, and whatever belongings they thought necessary to ride out the storm. The first to arrive was Mr. Harold, a middle-aged man with his wife and two young children. He approached the half-built wall cautiously, unsure of what he would find. "Mrs. Caldwell?" he called, his voice tinged with both fear and apology. Daniel said, "Well, he said a storm is coming. Can we stay here?" Margaret looked up from adjusting a stone on the wall. Sweat and grime streaked her face, but her expression was calm and resolute. "Of course," she said simply. "Come in. There's space, and we'll make sure everyone is safe. Your home may be in danger, but here you'll have protection." Mr. Harold's jaw dropped slightly. You'd let us in?" Margaret nodded, a faint smile appearing despite the strain on her face. "Your safety is more important than pride or doubt. Your trust in nature's signs is enough for me." Word spread quickly. By evening, 3 more families had arrived. Some were hesitant, still unsure if the warnings were real. Mrs. Dorothy, the neighbor who had once scolded Margaret for her madness, arrived with a small group of friends. They carried blankets and food, but approached cautiously, whispering anxiously among themselves. Margaret greeted them without judgment. "Come inside. There's room for everyone. You don't have to understand why I did this. All that matters is that we face the storm together." Inside, the Caldwell home transformed into a makeshift shelter. Blankets were spread on floors, chairs were pushed together, and the kitchen became a hub for warm drinks and quick meals. Margaret's eyes swept over the faces around her, worried, tired, and full of doubt, yet slowly beginning to trust her judgment. Robert moved among the guests, helping wherever he could. "Mom's right," he told a group of children huddled near the fireplace. "The wall will keep the wind from hitting the house directly. We'll be safe." Outside, Margaret returned to the final section of the wall. Stones heavy from days of labor, her hands still raw and bleeding, she worked with a focus that left no room for hesitation. Each placement was deliberate, each stone a testament to her years of observation and determination. The sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the snow-covered yard. With Daniel monitoring from his instruments, Margaret finally positioned the last stone. The wall, standing strong and unbroken, now completely enclosed the property. "It's done," she whispered to herself, brushing snow from her hands. Robert came up behind her. "Mom, it's perfect, strong, solid, just like you said it would be." Margaret smiled faintly, exhaustion weighing on every muscle. "Thank you, Robert. Now we wait, and we hope the wall does its job." The first gusts of wind began that night. A low moan carried across the property as the storm approached, stronger and more relentless than anyone had anticipated. The families inside huddled together, some fearful, some whispering prayers, but all trusting Margaret's judgment. Daniel checked the equipment again. "It's arriving faster than my models predicted. Winds over 70 miles per hour, snow accumulation that will be historic for this area. But your wall, it will hold." Margaret walked among the families, offering words of reassurance. "Remember William's words," she said softly. "Preparation is the key to survival. You may have doubted me, but now your safety is in your hands as much as mine. Together, we are stronger than any storm." The night deepened. Snow pelted against the windows and walls with increasing intensity, bending tree branches and flattening rooftops in other parts of Aspen. Yet inside the Caldwell home, warmth,
light and a sense of security prevailed. Children clung to their parents, whispering in awe about the wind that sounded like a distant howl, the snow that hammered the trees, and the storm's fury outside. Margaret kept watch, ensuring the windows were reinforced, the fire stoked, and the animals brought inside. Her gaze drifted to the completed wall, confident it would divert the storm's full force from the main house. By the early hours of the morning, the storm had reached its peak. The wall shuddered under the pressure of wind and snow, yet it held firm. Margaret stood at the window, watching the tempest, her heart calm despite the chaos. Daniel, monitoring from the side of the property, called out over the howl of the wind, "Mrs. Caldwell, it's holding! The wall is holding!" Margaret allowed herself a brief smile, brushing a lock of hair from her face. "Yes, Daniel, this wall isn't just stones. It's William's wisdom, my determination, and the trust of everyone who sought refuge here. It will hold." Through the long night, the families stayed close, sharing warmth, food, and stories to distract themselves from the storm outside. Margaret moved from group to group, ensuring everyone's safety, adjusting blankets and offering comfort. Every time she touched a hand or spoke a word of reassurance, the doubts and skepticism that had followed her for weeks seemed to melt away. When dawn finally broke, the storm had passed, leaving Aspen buried in record snow. Houses throughout the town had suffered, roofs collapsed under the weight, roads blocked and power lines downed. But the Caldwell property stood intact, shielded by the wall and Margaret's relentless preparation. Families emerged from the house in awe. Mr. Harold hugged his children close, tears streaking his snowy face. We survived. You saved us, Mrs. Caldwell. You saved all of us." Margaret shook her head, smiling faintly. "It wasn't me. It was the preparation, the work, and the wisdom your father gave me, and your willingness to trust and act when it mattered." Mrs. Dorothy approached, snow clinging to her coat, eyes wide with a newfound respect. "Margaret, I owe you an apology. I thought you were mad. I see now. You were protecting us all along." Margaret extended her hand. "Thank you. All that matters is that we are safe. Everything else can be forgiven." By mid-morning, the Caldwell home had become a hub of gratitude, relief, and shared experience. Neighbors who had doubted Margaret's judgment now worked together to clear paths, check on others, and ensure everyone had food and warmth. The wall, silent and imposing, remained a testament to foresight, determination, and love. Robert stood beside his mother, surveying the property and the families who now trusted them. "Mom, I think they finally understand. They finally see why you did this." Margaret nodded, placing a hand on his shoulder. "It's not about proving them right or wrong, Robert. It's about survival, compassion, and doing what's necessary when the time comes. William believed in preparation, and so do I. Now we continue, together." Outside, the wind still howled occasionally, but it no longer held the same threat. The wall had done its job. Inside, laughter and relief mingled with the soft murmur of grateful voices. And for the first time in weeks, Margaret felt a sense of peace, knowing that her determination, her belief in William's wisdom, and her own strength had saved lives.
The storm raged through Aspen with an intensity no living soul had ever experienced. Wind shrieked through the trees, ripping off branches and throwing them across snow-covered roads. Roofs cracked under the weight of heavy ice, and cars were buried under thick, unrelenting drifts. Townspeople who had refused to believe Margaret's warnings now watched helplessly from their windows as their homes succumbed to the storm's fury. Inside the Caldwell home, the atmosphere was tense but calm. Margaret moved from corner to corner, checking blankets, redistributing food, and soothing the children who clung to their parents, wide-eyed with fear. The wall outside, tall and unyielding, absorbed the full force of the storm, diverting snow and wind away from the house itself. Each gust that battered the stone structure tested Margaret's foresight, yet it held firm. Robert, standing beside the window, could hardly contain his awe. "Mom, it's incredible. The wall, it's keeping everything out." Margaret's eyes, red from fatigue and worry, softened as she placed a hand on her son's shoulder. "It's not just the wall, Robert. It's the love that built it. Every stone, every hour of work. It was all done with the care to protect others. That's what gives it strength." Outside, the town groaned and creaked under the storm's relentless assault. Many houses collapsed, their owners scrambling in fear. Snowdrifts piled high, isolating families in their homes. Roads disappeared under the white haze, leaving many stranded, waiting helplessly for the storm to pass. Yet the Caldwell property remained intact, a beacon of resilience amidst chaos. Margaret paused for a moment by the window, watching the wind bend the trees violently. A pang of grief crossed her face as she thought of William. For months she had labored tirelessly, misunderstood by almost everyone, mocked for her madness, yet now she understood fully. Her husband's instructions had never been folly. Every observation he had made, every note he had left, every pattern he had studied, had been driven by something far deeper than mere obsession. It was love, the kind that protects, guides, and inspires action even when no one else understands. Daniel's voice crackled from the radio. "Mrs. Caldwell, the wall is holding. It's extraordinary. Your property, it's safe. The families inside are secure." Margaret exhaled deeply, a mixture of relief and pride washing over her. "Thank you, Daniel. It wasn't just me. It was William, and it was all of us working together to honor that foresight." Children peeked through windows, marveling at the snowstorm outside, while wrapped in the warmth of blankets. Mothers and fathers exchanged glances, realizing that the woman they had once dismissed as crazy was the very reason they were alive today. They had entered Margaret's home as skeptics. Now they left with awe and gratitude. Hours passed, the storm slowly losing some of its initial ferocity. Yet Margaret did not relax entirely. Her mind replayed every lesson William had shared, every instinct she had trusted, every pattern she had followed. It had not been madness that predicted this storm. It had been research, observation, and a profound love for the people she cared about. By dawn, the snow had piled 3 times higher than any previous winter record. Streets were buried, and Aspen lay crippled beneath the icy weight. But Margaret's home stood strong. The wall, now gleaming under the soft morning light, was a monument not only to foresight, but also to courage, trust, and the enduring power of love. Neighbors began to emerge, awestruck and cautious, stepping carefully through the snow to inspect the Caldwell property. Mr. Harold, his children safely in tow, approached Margaret with tears in his eyes. You saved our lives. We have nothing but gratitude." Margaret smiled faintly, brushing snow from her sleeve. It wasn't anyone. It was William, and it was all of us working together to honor that foresight. Mrs. Dorothy, standing near the edge of the property, shook her head, finally understanding the depth of Margaret's strength. "I was wrong," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. We all were wrong." Margaret's gaze softened, her eyes scanning the faces of everyone who had taken shelter in her home. "The lesson here," she said quietly, "is that courage and love often go hand in hand. When we act with care and determination, even the greatest storms cannot destroy what matters most." As the storm subsided, a calm settled over Aspen.
Margaret stood at the door, looking at the wall she had built with her own hands, thinking about William and the legacy he had entrusted to her. She realized that survival was not just about sheltering from nature's fury. It was about protecting those you love, trusting in wisdom, and acting decisively when it counts most. And now, as the sun began to break through the gray sky, the Caldwell property became a symbol of hope and resilience, the story of a widow who turned grief into action, doubt into determination, and love into survival. Another emotionally linked story continues after this one. You'll be amazed by what happens when a poor girl protects an old man from thieves, not knowing he owns the biggest company. A story full of twists, courage, and heart. You don't want to miss it. Where are you watching from? Did you enjoy Margaret's story? Like, subscribe, and share with your friends so they can see how far courage and love can go. A young girl stumbles upon an old man in danger and instinctively decides to help. She has no idea he's a billionaire with secrets that could change her life forever. Suspense and emotional payoff as small acts of courage lead to life-altering consequences. Themes of trust, bravery, and unexpected rewards. Pure, heartwarming drama. Designed to grab curiosity instantly, audience can't resist clicking to see how her choices unfold.